Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR Software Business Quarterly Review webcast, delving into the recent results of TBR Software Vendor Reports and Software Business Benchmark. I'm Allison Crawford, and I'm hosting today's webinar. Over the past several quarters, we've engaged with our readers through this quarterly webinar series to provide additional insight into the state of the software market. We've had great interaction with you, and we're excited to continue to connect you as the TBR software practice grows. Before I pass this over to Stuart and Elizabeth, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we will be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on our materials that we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Stuart and Elizabeth will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to Stuart and Elizabeth at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. Now let me introduce Stuart Williams and Elizabeth Hedstrom Henlin. Elizabeth is our lead analyst covering enterprise software and has been working closely with the vendors covered in the report to understand their business models and strategies. Stuart leads our software and cloud research team and has been influential in developing Source IT, a cutting-edge research program focusing on buyer behavior in verticals like retail, manufacturing, healthcare, energy, and utilities, among others. And with that, let me hand this over to Stuart.
Thank you, Allison, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be covering a couple of perspectives today in this benchmark. The first piece that we're going to take a look at is really just a snapshot and understand where we're at in the current enterprise software space with some highlights from our 1Q13 software vendor benchmark, which we'll be publishing at the end of this week. The next piece we're going to do is take a little bit of a deeper dive and look at how and why vendors are shifting their business models in response to the slow growth that we've seen over the course of this year. The three key perspectives that we're going to be discussing are realignment of the business, restructuring around the portfolio, and reinvention of the companies themselves in response to changing dynamics of the marketplace. I'll be joined in our conversation with Elizabeth Hedstrom Henlin, so we'll be going back and forth on our points, and we certainly welcome your questions to be submitted. Allison will screen some of those out for us, and we'll be getting to those at the end of the presentation. So let's go on to the first slide. Where are we at in the enterprise software market today? What we see is slowing growth overall, and these overall license slowdowns that really drive the core part of the enterprise software space really begin to underscore the importance of vendors to link their portfolio and their new products and their new go-to-markets around addressing customer business solutions. We've seen this in a lot of different strategies and different ways that they're being played out tactically, but the core message is that because of cloud, because of mobility, analytics, big data, the options for clients to pay via subscription models, the changing of the technology base underneath software, all of these things, as well as the global economic tightness that we see in Europe and some slowdowns in Asia Pacific, really are creating the constrained markets for the software vendors to achieve the double-digit growth that they'd like to report to their investors. So with that in mind, we look at the space, we see a couple of different clusters of vendors, and Elizabeth will discuss some of the points around what individual vendors are doing as they begin to connect their portfolios to the customer's business problems.
Thanks, Stuart. I think it's fascinating to stand here as we are all halfway through the year, but looking at the results from 1Q13. This is a continuation of a journey that we tracked in varying stages across 2012, and the clusters of vendors that are sort of at the beginning, middle, and end of these journeys are pretty evident. On the far right, so first, just to orient to the graph, on the vertical axis, we are looking at average annual revenue growth for the vendor, and on the horizontal graph, revenue growth for 1Q13. So we're looking at a perspective in time. And the leaders, moving from left to right on the circles, when we look at VMware, Red Hat, Microsoft, and Commvault, are those vendors that really took a very hard look at how they go to market in the first half of last year and are really starting to recognize the benefits. For VMware and Commvault, it's about portfolio reinvention. Commvault really spent a lot of time looking at Sympana. It's their bread and butter, and they have not abandoned it. On the contrary, they've really put the time in to make it work for customers, and the feedback that we're hearing is that it's the most successful refresh Commvault has put together in quite some time. And data growth being what it is, backup still remains a top priority for a lot of purchasers at this point. For VMware, it was about focus, taking a hard look at a lot of the application-led diversity that came in under former CEO Paul Maritz, and really divesting of those assets that distracted from the data center-focused server virtualization business. And when CEO Pat Gelsinger came in at the middle of last year, he really made some very drastic moves very quickly, along with some help from new CFO Jonathan Chadwick, formerly of Microsoft. And so we see a continuing double-digit growth rate from that vendor, despite their material dominance at this point, still 80% or greater of the server virtualization market. So it shows a successful ability to cross-sell complementary products and stay focused on their install base. For Microsoft and Red Hat, as you can see, it's obviously a magnitudinal difference of scale when you look at the vendors themselves in terms of revenue. But ironically, it's a variation on the same story. These are vendors that understand the importance of their partners and spent a lot of time across last year making sure that new product launches were aligned with the channel and aligned with keeping partners engaged and keeping those relationships loyal, because as a lot of vendors are starting to look to the mid-market, not just Microsoft, but SAP, Oracle, and IBM, it really is about whose partners are most loyal and what incentives are keeping them that way. For Red Hat, while it's not necessarily a go-to-market partner story, it's a development partner story. This is a company that is competing against juggernauts that have much more money to spend than they do, and they're doing it through an influence-led relationship with its development partners, and they're recognizing growth from it. So to the middle of the road and the back of the pack, we look at IBM Software and Oracle, both companies that have been dealing with some struggles in revenue growth across this year, but have, as we see it, they're getting started on a journey to growth once again, and they have the cash power to catch up quick. So with that, let's take a look at the next slide. So from here, we take a deeper look. This is really taking a closer look at licensed revenue growth, and an interesting divergence between the last graph and this one, where you saw vendors much more aligned on a horizontal line of growth. Here, we're really taking a very strict 45-degree line between corporate revenue growth on the vertical axis and licensed revenue growth on the horizontal axis. And what that means is licensed revenue still moves the corporate needle for growth for all of these vendors. Microsoft really staying top of the pack again, but when you look at vendors like EMC and SAP, they're focused on efficiency, and they're focused on how can we reinvent and make it easier for our customers to refresh core installed software bases. And we already see vendors in the first part of this year making moves to keep licensed software revenue top of mind, despite the incursion of cloud and mobile deployments into deep portfolios. Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So what we really see here is strong evidence that the licensed business is still very much alive and well in the enterprise software space. Despite the emergence of alternative purchasing methods, subscriptions, either contract subscriptions or more utility-based ones for cloud deployments, it's begun to shift the needle a little bit, but and will continue to do so to a greater and greater extent over time. But today, when you want to drive that enterprise growth, the license remains the key element here, tied to that follow-on maintenance and services business that is responsible for driving the majority of the profits. So again, this is not an area of business that our clients should ignore or run away from. Buyers still, in many cases in our research, want to deploy in traditional modes. They want to explore the cost benefits for alternative means of consuming, but it doesn't mean that the license is dead. So let's move on to the next slide. So one of the things that we see here is that the drive to profitable growth is really around managing and choosing investments carefully. So the trade-offs in a slowing economy are around how do you grab share of wallet deeper across a customer's base, and also to take that in a competitive environment. And that takes investment, either in new products to open up the addressable market space, or in aggressive go-to-market activity to take the share away from competitors in the space where you already have offerings. And here we definitely see a series of different vendors that are playing out their investment scenarios that we see, because the trade-offs on the vertical axis here, we see corporate revenue growth, and on the horizontal axis, we see the operating margin. So when we look into the different quadrants around here, you can see, some of the trade-offs that happen. The bubbles that are higher up are firms that are experiencing greater growth, and the firms that are further to the right have higher operating margins. So, low growth, high growth, there's like Microsoft has done extremely well in positioning and sustaining itself as a high growth firm with consistently delivers high margins. The improving vendors are ones where we see them having the ability to sustain their margins over time, despite the fact that the growth rate of their business is declining just over time slowly. They're facing challenges in those areas. We see firms that are improving, really being able to take what they have because they're very strongly positioned with their customer bases and being able to add through acquisition, drive the growth there, but also taking those products and bringing them just to a global market opens up sales opportunities and revenue opportunities for them. So those are carefully balanced investments.
And it really comes down to what choices do you make and in what order. And I think if you look at the groupings of leaders, Microsoft is sticking with the relationships that work for them and making sure that they are putting the time in on the portfolio to keep it attractive. IBM Software and Oracle really maintaining a very tight rein on cost and investment, keeping not only operating margin high to satisfy Wall Street, relatively high I should say, but also making sure that they've got cash on the books to do the spending that they need to when they choose to. And looking at VMware and SAP, these are the firms that really invested for growth in the back half of last year and are starting to recognize the revenue results in the first half of this year, and will continue to do so across the balance of this calendar year.
Now, a couple of the firms that are actually off the charts here, Dell Enterprise Software, they're largely built up through acquisitions, and is a firm that's a division of Dell that's really investing heavily to drive integration. So we see that the business margin that they're having is negative for a reason, right? They have to integrate those acquisitions, integrate the portfolios so that they can begin to drive immediate wins on scaling up the business, look across the portfolio for integrated product opportunities, and then eventually they'll get to true innovation, net new breakthrough innovation. So they're investing heavily in time and treasure to build that. Salesforce and NetSuite are both a couple of companies that are very much investing just on the pure customer acquisition side. So that comes at a high cost. Half of every revenue dollar for Salesforce goes out the door in sales and marketing expenses. So it's extremely expensive way of driving its business growth, which is high. Now, a few firms down in the laggard section are actually in the process of reinventing themselves. So when we look at Symantec and Adobe, Symantec with its new CEO in place is taking incremental steps as it moves down through its organization on restructuring its business units and its businesses. And we anticipate, once that is cleared, a renewed focus on execution and improved performance Adobe themselves just announced a huge change in their business model in moving away from packaged software, moving completely to the cloud delivery for their Creative Suite. So, the transition for them is, they're back against the wall and having to look at how they need to react based on the change of the consumption patterns of their customer base, who are largely the creative types who are already web-enabled. Let's take a look. Let's move to the next slide, please. And for this piece, I'm going to have Elizabeth take the lead in delivering our presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Stuart. So we gave you the current state of the market. License revenue growth is not dead. Cloud and mobile delivery continue to disrupt a lot of traditional business models, and the vendors that we cover within the enterprise software landscape, both within our benchmark, which we showed you a moment ago, and now within our software business quarterly portfolio of reports, are choosing some very divergent tactics to jumpstart growth within core businesses and defend install-based customers from threat. When we look at our outlook for 2013, we see vendors, as Stuart mentioned at the beginning of our discussion today, really falling into three categories. Realignment: how do you make incremental changes to go-to-market and product strategies as a vehicle to drive growth? Restructuring: how do you really take a hard look at the fundamentals of your business and make, in many cases, some drastic moves to defend install-based customers, ensure stability of the core business, and build growth from that foundation? And finally, corporate reinvention. What happens when it's time to just shake everything up to its core to ensure that you can really reinvigorate performance? And these are some lagging vendors that we're going to take a look at in a moment relative to the landscape that we cover. With that, let's take a look at realignment. So when we look at realignment, these firms really started 2012 with an eye towards driving change. As we've had a conversation with many of you across these webinars, 2012 remained just a lagging growth year, and I think there were vendors that hoped to ride it out by doing as little as possible in order to not disrupt their core businesses. And then there were the vendors that decided to get out ahead of the change curve and really took a look at where their weaknesses were, where their opportunities were in the first half of last year, and started the spending then. And so when we look at IBM software, Microsoft, Red Hat, and SAP from our coverage portfolio, we see those vendors really having taken the time a year ago to make the big changes and are now in a position where they can choose what incremental next steps to make to accelerate growth rather than worrying about restarting. So for IBM software, I think this is an interesting evolution off of the Smarter Planet portfolio. It was about packaging, it was about a business-focused message, and now they're in a solid position where they are proven, trusted advisors to customers looking to solve business problems. As the saying goes back a number of years, you never get fired for buying Big Blue, and IBM really built on that reputation last year by packaging applications in a way that appealed to C-suite buyers, but also allowed IT to become solvers of not just technology problems, but business problems. So empower your executor, empower your purchaser, drive growth. Now it's about business applications, specifically business analytics. IBM is facing a number of revenue goals for 2015 that are very aggressive. They're looking at billions. They're looking to billions of dollars, $20 billion specifically in growth from business analytics alone by 2015. And it's about how do you add those analytic capabilities across core businesses such as information management to drive next steps. And we see Cognos and SPSS as really product levers for IBM to jump off offerings to the next level. For Microsoft, this is a case of too much of a good thing. They lead the enterprise productivity market, but their portfolio of offerings in that segment, Office, SharePoint, Lync, and Outlook, remain independent solutions rather than an integrated tool. we look at the integration of Skype with Link announced in 1Q as the start of a comprehensive integration strategy for Microsoft to take their productivity leadership and solidify it by creating an integrated end-to-end tool that customers can use for collaboration as well as productivity. When we look at Red Hat, this is a case of how do you use a limited megaphone most effectively? And for that, Red Hat has really looked at their acquisitions across the back half of last year. They had a couple of very targeted technology acquisitions, including FuseSource and ManageIQ. And picking those products that they could focus on integrating at a fundamental level with Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, building foundational extensions to an existing portfolio so that they could target renewal cycles as the place to really extend customers' buying power. So use your install base, and as Jim Whitehurst put it, land and expand over time. And executives noted on the recent 2Q13 earnings call that for the first time ever, their top 100 accounts all renewed with JBoss middleware as a portion of their portfolio of offerings. So Red Hat's playing a long game, but it's a game that's working for them because they continue to drive double-digit increases on their quarterly subscription revenue and annual subscription revenue. It was a 15% increase year to year in this quarter, and that's how they're looking at it, is that it's about how do you increase your footprint over time in a customer's environment. For SAP, SAP wants to add 7 percentage points between now and 2015 to their channel contributions. They're at 33% now. They want to be at 40 by 2015. And so they're looking at regional test cases for how to increase channel territory, increase channel buy-in, and at the same time, increase the efficiency of direct sales by targeting them at the biggest of the big. So North America, they took 5,000 direct sales accounts between $500 million and $1 billion and realign those to the channel. So they're creating clear swim lanes for direct and indirect. And disaggregation of conflict is one of those strategies that we see continually driving results in terms of increased channel engagement and increased channel loyalty. And with SAP's focus on driving sales of the business suite powered by SAP HANA as well as SAP HANA itself, from our conversations at Sapphire in May of this year, this is the right way to make sure that your channel is ready to carry the water for you on business application sales. So from realignment, incremental changes to restructuring. They're bigger changes, but they're changes that vendors are choosing to make and choosing to make to take growth to the next level. So when we take a look at our profiles as case studies from our Software Business Quarterly reports of HP Software, Oracle, and VMware, they're looking to their channel and they're looking to core businesses. And so it's about getting back to basics and making sure that you've got the right allies, be it your channel or in VMware's case, your customers, to ensure that your core businesses are both protected and set up for growth. When we look at the case history for HP Software and Oracle, HP Software has always been a channel stalwart, and with the turmoil at a corporate level for HP, as well as a number of executive defections from that channel team to vendors including VMware, it's about now how do you incent channel partners to stay loyal and support your revenue growth as a company while you make the direct sales moves that you need to make to drive growth over the longer term. For Oracle, it's about high-profile products and increasing competition in core business, core areas of business, including applications as well as databases. And so how do you incent your channel to really get Fusion applications in particular off the ground? And for VMware, as we mentioned at the start of our conversation, it's about taking the focus away from, in many cases, end-user applications, as with the divestitures of SlideRocket and a number of other non-core assets, as they put it, and getting back to the data center and making sure that Microsoft, Citrix, and Red Hat don't continue to take share in the server virtualization market at your expense. So HP Software took the back half of last year and took more than 60 products and packaged them into 4 families. of offerings, including business intelligence and analytics and security as major growth drivers. As they said, how do we expect our sales teams, be it direct or indirect, to really take that many divergent products to market coherently? And we said it then and we maintain it now. That was the right move at the right time to make sure that a compelling portfolio of products was packaged in a way that it was easy for customers to consume, particularly around business intelligence and analytics. The Vertica and Autonomy portfolios remain critical assets for HP, and we believe that they are positioned now for HP to drive significant applications growth for its HP software business in the back half of this year. Also, as we highlight on this slide, HP is using its channel to jumpstart security-driven growth, taking ArcSight and Fortify to the next level with managed service provider and reseller implementations. For Oracle, they had a chance to really trumpet their partner successes in 1Q13 around partner-led implementations of Fusion applications for HCM, Human Capital Management, and CRM, Customer Relationship Management, two areas that are being hotly contested by not only Microsoft and SAP, but disruptive cloud competitors, including Workday. So it was a chance for Oracle, and we think successfully, to take back some of the negative unearned media attention around the length of time it took to bring Fusion applications to market and demonstrate the rising traction of this portfolio, because if their partners are spending money on it, then it's not only real, but it's being purchased by customers and it's ready to implement. So it was an excellent proof point for a new portfolio. And finally, we look at VMware and its chance to really take non-core assets and in partnership with majority shareholder EMC, use the newly launching Pivotal entity as a chance to drive big data growth and keep everyone playing together and making sure that each team is set up to drive its own story well.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I just wanted to jump in here for a second to comment about these three very, very different firms. Obviously, what does this mean? Because we see restructuring happening, but it's actually three different forms of restructuring. So HP software, obviously it's a component of the larger Hewlett-Packard, which itself is undergoing tremendous change, facing a lot of challenges in the marketplace as we see the shifts in the server market, and the way that they begin to package and bring the value of the software portfolio forward around what has been traditionally a hardware-driven business. We see this as a tremendous internal challenge at Hewlett-Packard. It's not that the people in that division don't understand software, but the way that it's sold and how they work with their channel partners, the transformation of their resellers into more solution sales, and the way that they leverage both across the hardware and across their partners' hardware as well, is very difficult. And when we look at the other side of the coin here, we see a company like IBM that has a similar bent, really leveraging its software to drive the profit of the company rather than the other way around. Key piece here is the investment in new intellectual property that's going on across Hewlett-Packard. So we expect that to take time, but it certainly is an area where software can very, very quickly jump to the fore and drive some net new profit. Quickly, I just want to touch on Oracle and VMware. Oracle has a tremendous pile of assets that it can drive into the business. So looking at the way that they lead and leverage their partners shifts the risk out to the partner community. So vendors who clearly have a large and largely fixed portfolio can take that, shift that mix and take away some of its direct expense and shift it into the partner community around some of the more mature products. Here we see it happening in Fusion applications, but even there, that's the installed customer base is the first place to go, and their reseller partners with the SIs are going to drive this. And then VMware is a component of a larger EMC holding company or conglomerate approach to the marketplace. So the way that you structure and restructure the assets in a more fluid manner to be able to capture opportunity gives you the ability to set up units that can be can be more narrowly targeted to disrupt. So when we see assets coming out of VMware and moving into Pivotal, we really see this as a strategy that's designed to attack markets very aggressively rather than just to recombine what's already there. So we want our clients to think about this from a strategic point of view, and then to think about, when I compete against these firms or do business with them, how does this restructuring begin to change how I have to interact with them?
So from restructuring to corporate reinvention, and for the vendors that we're talking about in this section, this is about big, bold moves, now or never strategies, and just a chance to finally take themselves out of the lagging column and into improving growth. So the vendors in this category are single or dual segment players that are really focused on increasing their competitiveness, and we're going to look at BMC, CA, and Symantec, and where they're taking their next steps for growth. But we don't expect them to realize new opportunities until probably the back half of 2014. So for BMC, we're looking at activist investors really taking them private and taking them to the next level. And sometimes the best medicine is the bitterest that you don't want to take. We are looking at BMC as really taking a chance to come out ahead of competitors in systems management by moving their investments in cloud and mobility ahead and taking the opportunity of Wall Street's eyes shifting off them for a time to really go back to basics and realign their portfolio and their go-to-market strategy around near-term growth. We think MyIT, their recent launch, is a disruptive product. It has a material opportunity to increase their competitiveness with disruptor vendors like ServiceNow. And we think a stab into mobile and cloud management is really a chance to take their strengths in mainframe management to the next level and capitalize on delivery methods that customers are really interested in and are hoping to see from them. From one side of the coin to the other, CA Technologies, under new CEO Michael Gregoire, who's formerly of Taleo, cloud-based vendor, he's really looking at Gregoire is really looking at CA rather as a chance to take this vendor and make them agile. When you're looking at the fourth consecutive quarter of 3% or in that area revenue decline, this company is really looking at how do we draw our line in the sand around efficiency, around eliminating duplicative assets and personnel, and around driving flexibility. So they're looking at losing probably about 1,200 people across the balance of the next year and taking their chance to drive revenue growth around a product-led strategy for growth. We see 5 core product areas per Gregoire around mainframe, security and mobility, business management, and then application management and service assurance, all you'll note tied to core mainframe strengths as a chance to really capitalize on Gregoire's SaaS-based experience and look at long-term product development in these areas that include SaaS capabilities but also improve integrations to on-premise deployment. So this is CA Technologies' real chance to create what other competitors are referring to as a seamless user experience. So stick with what you know, do it well, and make sure that it is as agile internally as your customers need you to be externally. And finally, we look at Symantec, and this is a company that has continued to struggle across the balance of last year, but it was the first, 1Q13 was their first positive financial quarter in some time. They saw $1 billion in revenue, $1.7 billion in revenue, excuse me, and $251 million in profit, record performance for Symantec on both fronts. But we maintain that it's too soon to wave the flag of success because recurring performances in this vicinity are going to be what really shows that CEO Steve Bennett's efficiency measures and restructuring are really taking the company to the next stage of growth. In particular, the design of a renewals team within direct sales we maintain is going to be the strongest driver of growth for Symantec across the balance of this year and into next.
So just a quick word on these pieces with the restructuring. Just because a firm has entered a serious restructuring phase doesn't mean that they're out. These are sizable, leading software vendors that we continuously track and that we see positive response from the customer base. Despite the fact that they're taking steps, particularly CA and Symantec, proactively to rebuild these businesses so they can be more successful, we view that as a positive step. Despite the short-term pain, which may lead to them getting beaten up by Wall Street, but we're not Wall Street. So we take a little bit of a longer view here and see that CA does have a large portfolio. The large barriers there is really around messaging and accelerating the adoption of that, particularly outside of the mainframe business. And Symantec obviously is looking to transition from what being perceived in some cases solely around its strengths and security to a more broadly held position and a more nimble firm. So we'll be tracking these three firms specifically over time as they reinvent themselves, and we'll be doing more call-outs, diagnosing their performance as we go forward.
So what's next? As we start the 2Q13 earnings cycle, as many of you may know, Oracle and Red Hat, in terms of the covered companies we discussed today, have already shown some positives and some negatives thus far in the year. We're really looking at the balance of this year as how do you protect what you have and build a foundation for growth, whether it's protect your value to your customers or protect those customers themselves from competitive threat. We see the balance of this year really focused for vendors in this segment on driving up share of wallet, and particularly through portfolio investment. How do you take your core offerings and align them to business problems as well as IT problems, but also align them to high-interest trends, which continue to be cloud deployments, mobile deployments, and from the new adoption, analytics as a driver to realize value from data already in a customer's environment. Long-term revenue, how do you grow your customer base, in many cases either with help or at someone's expense? And I'll steal from my own script from a couple of months from now by mentioning when we look at Oracle announcing new partnerships with Salesforce.com and Microsoft as a vehicle to set up their forthcoming 12C database. That's a key example of how do you make new friends as a vehicle to drive your brand into new install bases and set up for long-term growth. Or you look at how do you combat your foes, and we think that the market for acquisitions is by no means closed this year, but they will be very targeted and very tactical in nature, and they will be designed to combating near-firm market foes. So longtime competitors are going to be looking at technology-driven acquisitions to expand key aspects of core portfolios. Stuart, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, specifically I believe that we're going to be looking at this in conjunction with our public cloud market landscape report that looks at the 40 leading vendors in public cloud, and really looking at an era of consolidation going on there. We've begun to see it with a lot of the Salesforce.com and IBM acquisitions this past quarter, and as well as what we see with SAP and Oracle. These are bellwether events that as we see the cloud vendors beginning to acquire each other and the traditional vendors taking the cash off their balance sheets and investing it to help drive revenue and to expand their capacity to engage with the end customers. If they can't do it organically, they can begin to drive it through acquisition. Key element here is the oil and water of a traditional software business mixing with a cloud business, and we see some different models there. Either run them as a separate business, which we see SAP and IBM doing because of the pace of change and adoption are different, or driving the full integration that we see happening at Oracle and some other firms. So these are two key strategies for us that we'll be keeping an eye on as we go forward and bringing some of these data factors back and forth across those two benchmark products. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up and take some questions.
Great. This is actually my favorite part of the webinar. So not only do we want your questions, but I'd like to encourage everyone out there to challenge anything that the analysts have just said. Obviously, you guys are very entrenched in the software market, and so we'd like to hear from you in terms of what you're facing, what you're working on, and how our analysts can help you. We had a couple questions come through. I would encourage anyone to send through any questions we have now. We might run a little longer to answer some of the questions that have come through so far. The first question, guys, is can traditional installed vendors return to high growth in the maturing enterprise software market, and how?
Can
traditional installed vendors return to high growth in a maturing enterprise software market? How and how?
Well, so that's a great big question. But so when we think about maturing vendors, typically we think about the install base and the mature markets there, right? So we see one of the key elements there, and a tactic that has been done is to go overseas and go into emerging markets. How that's structured, whether it's done through partnerships initially, or whether it's done by opening offices, or taking an industry-led approach, or co-selling through alongside a partner, really depends on the way that the customers prefer to buy. So before you go into an emerging market, make sure that you look before you leap, and understand some of the consumption patterns, because if your clients want to buy through a trusted local figure, and they know your brand but they don't really know you, you have to make sure that you align with that and give yourself the time to understand and react through the different cultural patterns. Not everybody is the same kind of North American or Western European IT buyer that many of us think of. So another piece there, obviously, is the shifting elements of the market itself. So it's great to have a product that's a cash cow and that drives high profitability, but we see continuous change, and mature firms, in particular with large installed bases, face tremendous challenges in moving that base. We see that in, for example, a classic Microsoft OS challenge in moving to Windows 8. So let's think about how that would be a whole nother webinar. I'm happy to take that up on another call if our questioner has a specific details around a situation or a scenario that they'd like to discuss.
Okay. I think we're probably going to have time for maybe 2 more questions. The next question we had come through, are there specific management software winners that you see going forward as better across the platform, virtualization, cloud management stack?
This officially is my favorite question thus far, because this is squarely in my coverage area when I look at VMware, Red Hat, and Citrix. And I like to think that we're now in virtualization 3.0, because for all of this talk about the software-defined data center, what it comes down to is how do you manage and orchestrate, in many cases, a heterogeneous hypervisor environment. So I think, honestly, Red Hat is a real challenger in this space, and I think they're capitalizing on the fact that right now no one's paying a whole lot of attention to them. They're really focused on the heterogeneous aspect of it that VMware has had to acquire to catch up with, and they have a real advantage in their ties to open source development and the open source community, because they have the evangelists that are going to be influencing the software buys, already loyal and already tied to them. I think when you look at folks like Citrix, this is the player that's coming at it from a completely different point of view. They're staying focused on the server, they're staying focused on the overall environment and the install, and I think VMware is really going to have some challenges ahead of them in terms of keeping up with these players that are capitalizing on VMware's long-standing reputation for being a single stack. Stuart, anything you want to add?
Other than that, there's going to be continuous change. Now, certainly when we look at this space, we're looking at the hybrid environment, particularly as a key driver. The ability for people to deploy and manage unique clouds is becoming fairly mature when we look at the emergence of open source alternatives and how well that's expanded this last year. That's just a sign for us that the technology is moving out of the proprietary research labs and into the broader environment where people are beginning to have, there's enough capacity there to develop and support open source alternatives. So where's the next area? And that's really around management and orchestration across workloads, across clouds, and to enable that type of a dynamic to exist, not just inside the firm, but also for firms that are managing processes for their clients and for brokers as well, to be able to tie that together. The assurances that have to go up and down a stack in order for those types of business models to work really aren't in play yet. We see some communities emerging that are being validated or certified so that the risk is shared up and down the stack for delivery. That's really a key element for how that model will evolve over time out in a broader ecosystem sense. So those really are some key areas that we see evolving, as well as the product suite itself.
Great. Unfortunately, we have run over time. There are a couple more questions in queue, so we're going to reach out to you folks individually to answer those questions. So before you all sign off, I'd like to run through a couple of things that you should all be aware of. First of all, Stuart will be down in Houston speaking at the Microsoft World Partnership Conference July 7th through the 11th. He's giving a presentation, the guidelines for vendors in public cloud. So if you are in the Houston area, we encourage you to reach out to Stuart and connect with him. I've also included Stuart and Elizabeth's Twitter handles. We encourage you to follow Stuart and Elizabeth on Twitter as well as TBR. And as promised, here are the links for SlideShare and YouTube so you can reach out and get all those presentations. We will be sending out this deck to everyone that has attended today. So if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask Stuart and Elizabeth, we will be able to set up those conversations. Additionally, we have a couple of new documents that we'll be sending out, so keep an eye out for them. They're conversational documents on the analyst opinion on what's happening in the market. We'll be doing that on cloud, software, and BI, so keep an eye out over the next 2 or 3 weeks for those. We'll be sending them into your inbox. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time. There is a short survey. It's 3 questions on the quality of the presenters, the quality of the presentation, and an open comments box that if you have any thoughts on topics you'd like to be hearing more about, ways we can improve the presentations, things that you would find more valuable, we do really value that feedback because we are trying to improve the interaction from quarter to quarter, making sure that you guys find value in the time spent with us today. So please do send those through. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another couple of minutes in case there's any last-minute questions or comments or requests for meetings. And if we don't hear from you, we will talk to you guys all again in another quarter. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and thanks for calling in.